beginners. If you're in the wrong place, stay here anyway. Okay. My name is Tiffany of Tiffany Gordon Cosplay. I am a full-time costume and prop fabricator and educator on YouTube with lots and lots of costume and prop building tutorials. So go there for more information. I have been cosplaying since 2008. My first convention was Ikkicon. And I've made it full circle to being a guest here. I've been doing this now full-time for 3 years-ish. And I pay my bills with this, so I'm very happy about that. But to start off, EVA foam, how many people have worked with this material? Raise your hand. Oh, we have so many new people with it. Oh, awesome. Okay, so EVA foam is something I am very, very happy to work with. Normally, my costumes are not this. They're normally more armor built. This animal was supposed to be yesterday. I was going to be wearing wings. Different outfits, so apologies. I did bring some props though, so you can look at that. But EVA foam is a very lightweight material that is really, really easy to work with, beginner friendly, and comes in different thicknesses and different types of materials. EVA foam can come in any color. Typically, if you are buying them from either Amazon or TNT Cosplay Supply, which is local here in Dallas, Texas, they will be either in gray or in black. The color doesn't matter at all. There is also what is called the EVA foam, or like the foam puzzle piece mats, and those you can buy at like Home Depot and Walmart. You can also use the little kid like play mats too. Those typically will have a texture on one side, and they're okay to work with, but not the best quality, so I recommend either doing TNT or Amazon. You can also get EVA foam from Hobby Lobby or from Joann's. The quality of those foams, they work, but they're not the best, so just beware. So yeah, but I will, I guess, pass this way. These are a bunch of different samples. They come in different sizes too. Toss it to you. Oh, sorry. And on the back of each of them, it'll have like a little description of what it is. But it comes in 1mm thickness all the way till, I work up to 12, but I know there is thicker EVA foams. Typically, the ones that I use the most are 4mm, 6mm, 10mm, and 12mm. I like to work in different thicknesses because with working with armor, you want to have a more wide variety and different parts have different thicknesses, and if you're just stacking them, it's a little bit of a waste of money because if you're having to stack 2mm to get to 10, that's a lot of foam to get to that, so it's easier just to buy the thicker piece. For cutting EVA foam, you're going to want a cutting mat. For thinner EVA foam, you can technically use scissors. Not always the cleanest, but it works. Scissors will work for 1mm to typically 4, but 4 is a little, you start to actually look like scissor cutting. I prefer using an X-Acto knife, and that one will work from 1 until like 8mm. And you want, for X-Acto knife blades, preferably the stiff blades that aren't going to wobble on you. If you wobble it and it bends when you cut it, you're going to have a curvature to your foam cuts. And you always want really, really nice sharp blades. So invest in packs of X-Acto blades for cutting EVA foam, or having sandpaper and just rub it back and forth to sharpen it. That's a cheap way. You can also use a box cutter. Box cutters I typically will use for 8mm and thicker, just because you can make the blade longer. And the only downfall with box cutters is detail-wise, it's not as nice. So preferably using an X-Acto knife so you can get a much more fine detail, especially if you're cutting, I don't have a good example here, but if you're cutting like really small, intricate pieces, you want to use that. So for texturing, I got lots. They're really fun. First one is like my Monster Hunter one. I just added it to the file. But going through, you can use with a heat gun and with some aluminum foil. You heat up the foam and you can press into the foam that texture of the foil or anything. You can have like a rock and push it into the EVA foam, and the foam will actually take the texture of that. One downfall though is if it is a very light, subtle texture on top, going through paint and priming it and all of that will slowly make it disappear. So you will want your texture to actually be probably more pronounced on the foam than what you actually want it to be in the end, just because going through all of the processes is going to slowly kind of fade. Other things you can use is an X-Acto knife to do texture, where you pierce the blade halfway through the foam, and then you use a heat gun, and it's actually going to open up the channel of where you cut it, and it'll leave a nice little mark. Same with using a Dremel, which is power tools and everything, and a sanding drum or sanding stones, and you make really, really nice marks with that. And then other textures you can use, and I will pass this in just a second, is like hot ones, hot wires, hot knives. They're all the same family. Basically, yeah, plug it into the wall, and you have like a little thing on top. Each one does different textures. And it will actually burn your EVA foam and leave different surfaces. A little fun one, when you get to this one in the sample booklet, this is actually puff paint. And for this, it is going to leave a higher surface onto the EVA foam, where all the other ones you're technically leaving marks in the foam. So this is an additive. And for this process, that's the only one that you will need, and the next one. You'll want to do that as the very last process before painting, just because you won't be able to use a heat gun afterwards with this, or it'll bubble. And then quick seal as well. And I was talking about heat treating as well. So heat treating is a very important step with EVA foam. Your EVA foam, when you get it, try not to make that loud, looks like this on the surface. When you use a heat gun, it closes it all up and has no more pores. So if you don't use a heat gun, then when priming and painting, all of it is going to be absorbed into the foam, and it's going to take so many more coats. Where the heat treating, making the surface like fully firm on top, or whatever, crispy, crunchy, good. It just makes it a lot easier, and it is going to make an even coat onto all of your foam in the end. You can also use a heat gun to bend your foam into shapes. So if you are doing a shoulder pad and you want it to go from the front to the back, one piece of foam, using a heat gun, you can heat it up. When it's hot, you can slowly bend it to the shape that you want, and then hold it into that position until it cools off, and it'll stay like that. If it's a larger piece, I recommend taping it into that shape and then letting it stay a little bit longer. Next step is going to be doing priming. And there's a couple of different methods you can use. You can do Mod Podge. I'm not a big fan of this, but for a budget, it is very more affordable than doing Plasti dip. For my armor work, I do Plasti dip, which is a rubber spray paint. And for this, you want to spray 3 to 4 heavy coats onto both the front and the back. Hand painting, airbrush painting. Both are fine. I like doing airbrush painting just because it looks a lot cleaner. And for my method, because I travel all the time with my costumes and my armor, all has to fit in a suitcase. It's not going to get bent in a suitcase. Let's be real. It does no matter what, even if you're going in a car. And with an airbrush gun and the paint on that, you can use a heat gun to get all of those cracks and seams out of your foam afterwards when it's completely finished. I also bend a lot of my armor after it's made and painted to the shape. So that's my little trick with that. But hand painting works just as fine. The only issue with hand painting is you're doing a lot of layers by hand. You have the paintbrush strokes. It can be a little bit messy, and you really can't use a heat gun afterwards on it because it's more likely to make the surface bubble up from the paint just because you're doing a lot more coats. For attaching your EVA foam, if you're doing armor and want to attach it to your body, I would recommend doing a bodysuit and then Velcro. Velcro and EVA foam are like your best friend. So try to avoid Velcro with an adhesive back because the adhesive does not work. Contact cement glue on the adhesive backing. It works once and then it peels off. Don't do that. So try to get the stuff that does nothing on the back. Contact cement glue is also your best friend when it comes to EVA foam and attaching the pieces together, which contact cement glue, the proper use of that is for your two pieces. You're attaching this side and this side together. Apply the contact cement glue to both surfaces and let them fully dry before attaching them. If you attach them while they are still wet, it's going to move on you. You're going to get a lot more of a wobbly seam, as well as if they are large, flat surfaces. So like if you take the palm of your hand, you have a little like kind of negative spot right there. It's not completely flat. And if you were to glue that to the table, you'd still have in the center a bunch of glue that can stay wet up to a week. So that can cause problems if you are sanding 2 layers of foam together, because if your sanding drum comes to a wet spot of contact cement glue, not the greatest, and that's also going to cause your edges to come up. Also, with contact cement glue and gluing your foam, it does reactivate with a heat gun and heat. So a little trick with that is to heat treat your pieces first before gluing them together. And that's going to save you a lot more time in the end, where you can just do a very light treat over everything. But for like gauntlets, if you want to attach, pretend this is foam, because we know this is not foam. But for attaching them, a lot of times I'll make my piece where it goes around, and I'll do a 2mm piece of foam, glue it underneath the tube, and then I'll have Velcro. So that way it's completely hidden. Other options are doing zippers. Sometimes they work, but then you have a zipper that is shown. And it depends on your design, but a lot of times it's not the cleanest work. And I just prefer the Velcro. But whatever works for you, do that. For today, this EVA foam and CPVC pipe, which is basically PVC, but a lot nicer to work with. You will need a respirator if you are going to bend CPVC pipe, and I'll talk about that with the next one. I'll pass this around. Shut it. Where's John? Okay. And this, EVA foam. It's for sale. Come to my booth. Oh, wow. So it's all EVA foam. Can y'all hear me without the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to do that then. So this part right here, which is the handle, with my props, I always do a bone structure in between. If you were just to make this flat out of EVA foam, it's going to be floppy. Same with wings. Wings are a big one. Always have bone structures in your wings, or they're just going to be sad. But for this, it is a CPVC pipe that actually goes from here, it bends here, all the way to here, bends downward to these shapes. So it follows the curvature of the purple part. And that is the best thing to do for your props. You can also make them disassemble. So I was thinking, I didn't bring that prop this time. For all of my Monster Hunter costumes and for my wings, they all disassemble and fit in a suitcase. So if you've seen my 8 feet across wings, they all go in a suitcase. And they're all the same process of CPVC pipes and a lot of times EVA foam. But for CPVC pipes, you can use a heat gun and heat it up, and at a certain temperature you'll notice that it starts to kind of get a little loose, and at that point you will want to use safety gear, ventilated area, heat resistant gloves. There's a whole process with that. Tutorials on YouTube on my channel. But once you heat it up, you can then bend it to the shape that you want and hold it in that placement until it cools, and it'll harden in that shape. And you can continue that to bend it into this little curvature all the way around. And you can do full circles. You can make it, it's hard to do, but typically like my bone structures, I just do like a full bend, but you can do a curvature. It just takes a lot more time to make it nice and pretty. And when it's just an inside a bone structure piece, you don't need to worry about it. But for something like this, typically I have, so this is, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of 10mm foam glued together to give you the thickness, just because that's what I have around the house. So the 2 pieces in the center will have the CPVC pipe there, and it has the channel cut out of there, and then on top would be the flat surface. So this basically, it was not carved in the shape, it was not round, it was just straight up and down. And that's the easiest way to work with EVA foam, and then carve it afterwards. So it's just sandwiched in between. And then for that, just taking a box cutter and just kind of whittle it to the shape that you want, slowly cutting down, and then I take it to the workbench and I sand. You can sand by hand with, it's a lot longer, but just get like one of the painting mixing sticks and double-sided tape and glue your sandpaper on and go to town. That's gonna take a long time, but you do that. You can do it by hand too, but same thing. But I like a Dremel and then just a sanding drum, and done, easy. If you're working in big pieces of foam that you like, typically sanding drums at a hardware store, they're like this tall. Get a 2-inch one on Amazon. It's that tall. Also with foam, so I was talking about with this one, this is one solid piece here. This piece and this piece are actually hollow on the inside though. So that, making templates with foam, you can do with, like, for armor on your body, best friend, saran wrap and masking tape. Just wrap yourself. Tutorials on YouTube. And same with breastplates and everything. You want to be careful if you're doing it to yourself, not to go in full circles, because you will cut off your circulation. For doing any type of saran wrap patterning for EVA foam, you want to push your tummy out as much as you can. You want to be as big as you can. You want to stretch as much as you can and not make it small. Because EVA foam, it's going to go smaller when you work with it, just because, especially with thickness, like if you're making, you take a piece of fabric, it's super, super thin, and you put it around your arm. That's going to be like the length of it. But EVA foam, if it's 2mm or 10mm, when it bends around your body, it's not going to go all the way around. It's only going to be at that very bottom part. So technically when it comes around, the bottom will be here, but the top will be here. So you will need to add a little bit more. So with all of my foam patterning, I always typically add a seam allowance, just like with sewing. So typically like a centimeter or so, just to have that extra buffer. And then afterwards you can go through and make it smaller, wherever you need. But for doing templates for like these two, you can just do it out of paper and just a little paper mock-up, draw a circle, and then like, that's what I did is for this one, it's 2 halves put together. So you just have like the shape of the moon flat on the table. I did that, and then I cut out pieces of paper and kind of laid it and got relatively the shape that I wanted, and then mocked it up, like taped it together with the paper pattern, and then just cut it out of foam. So this part is 4mm, same with the stars. So yeah, and then flat part. These are also same thing of just hollow on the inside. Circles in EVA foam. Don't ever cut a circle by hand. Invest in some circle tools, specifically Cos tools. They have a circle hole kit, which is literally, it's like If you're making cookies and you have the little cookie cutter and you just push it in, that's what it is for foam. And just whoop, circle, pull it out, push the button, it pops it out. So all of these circle pieces at the bottom, I don't know if y'all can really see them, those are all just punched out. And the circle hole ones, drill kit, they go from like this big and then all the way up to like an inch, I think. And then they have a larger circle hole, circle hole drill, and then circle cutter, I think is the exact one. But it's basically like this big, and it's got a handle on it. It's really funny tool. But you put it on the table onto your foam. You're going to want a cutting mat underneath it so you don't cut your table. And then you just screw it constantly, and it's slowly going to spin the knife in a circle going down into your foam, and then you never have to cut a circle again, because they are a nightmare no matter what. I don't care what level, how long you've been working, don't ever cut a circle. They're not going to be a circle. So yeah. But, I do this full time. I work 100 hours a week. So yeah, this took me 2 weeks to make, but I'm also working on like 2 to 3 costumes and props at a time. Where something like this is also EVA foam, so the circle cutter, hole drill. Same with this. This is just a bunch stacked together and then carved to shape. And then this one in between is I'm like looking at it. It's a sheet of 10 millimeter and 2 sheets of 8 millimeter to give this. So super lightweight. You can spin it. It took like a day. So. So for attaching Velcro to your bodysuit, sewing it would be the best option. The cheap way, you could technically hot glue. It's okay to start off with. Yeah. Try to move away from that. But for attaching Velcro to your EVA foam armor, you would just still apply it to the back, and then so to the non-adhesive Velcro that you're going to invest in, apply the contact cement glue to that, and to the spot where you want it to attach on your armor on the inside. Wait for it to dry and attach. And for Velcro on armor, a lot of times if there's a placement like I want to attach, I use a star instead because people can see that. So if I want my Velcro to be for some reason this shape and cut it out that size, I would actually kind of put it onto the surface and trace it where the glue is going to go, take it off, and apply the glue in that spot. With contact cement glue, it shows through your Plasti dip, it shows through your paint job. It adds a slight texture to the surface. So for the most clean surfaces, it's best to only apply it where it's going to be needed. Yeah. So there is going to be a limitation of, especially with thicker pieces of EVA foam, when you bend it together, you're going to want a nice flat surface to bond it with. If your edges are, if you cut it out and it's really jagged and you're trying to connect 2 jagged pieces together that aren't flush, it's going to cause problems to attach. So it's best to use a sanding drum and sand them flat as much as possible. Also, you can cut, they don't have to be perfectly like 2 straight up and down connections. You can also have it where you sand at an edge. And so depending on the curvature that you're attaching, so if it's a point like this, you're going to want your EVA foam to be cut at that angle to attach. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. For fixing cracks and seams, because, you know, we've had that issue, you can first use a heat gun to heat up the contact cement glue there, and then hold it together while it's still hot, put the heat gun away, and then see if it'll attach that way. That's the best result first. Same with if you're attaching like a shield, there's 2 halves to make a curvature for a shield together. Best thing for all attaching foam pieces, use the table. Attach your pieces to the table, always touching the table. Don't attach your pieces in mid-air, because that's going to cause your line to not like wiggle back and forth. Other ways for fixing cracks and seams would be quick seal, which is it's like the wall putty that goes around all of your bathroom like sinks and stuff. Beware with that. Any type of painting or Plasti dip afterwards on top of that surface is going to have a different shine. Quick seal, when it dries, is a lot more shiny compared to EVA foam, which is a lot more matte and dull. So you'll always have a different shine on that section. For me, when I use it, I typically don't use it anymore. I've gone through a different process, but it's a lot more beginner friendly, is apply it on, like if you have like a toothpick or something, apply it there, and then use water and kind of wipe it away so it's only in that crack, and you don't have it as like a band-aid on top kind of thing. You want as little as possible to be seen. The method that I've gone to now is actually foam clay, which is a kind of clay-like version of EVA foam. If you've worked with clay before, you have to have water with it to work. So if you're having problems with foam clay, that's probably the issue. But foam clay, for that, you'll want to have a paintbrush with water, and you will use the water onto the surface specifically for fixing cracks. You'll apply it to the crack part, and then you'll get your foam clay, and then you will put it into that crack, and then again with water and your finger, you will slowly rub it back and forth to smooth it away. Foam clay though, I can't recommend sanding it too much because it just goes to dust and falls apart really easily. A lot of people use it for sculpture pieces, and it works, but it kind of has its fallbacks too, where I a lot of times will still just make it three-dimensional like this and then kind of add to it. So with EVA foam, if you are just cutting it, no issue. If you're using a heat gun, no issue, except if you're, for some reason, you have a toxic surface, you've added something to it, then that's individual, yeah. For sanding, I always wear a face shield just because I have a background in metalsmithing, and teaching a bunch of Metal 1 students how to sand with a sanding drum for the first time, half the time they break all their sanding drums because they're pushing too hard. So I just have safety ingrained in my head of face shield. Also with sanding drums, the sanding drum little thing that goes on top sometimes comes off. Sanding circles. I used to do live streaming on Twitch making my costumes. I'm moving the live streaming to YouTube now, so another go to YouTube. But I've had multiple times where I'm sanding live and I'm wearing my face shield, but like sanding circles and things, you're holding it with your hand. The sanding drum will rip it out of your hand and bop you in the face. I'm wearing a face shield, I'm fine. It's EVA foam, but it can still hurt, so always a face shield. With sanding, you can use, like, if you're not wearing a face shield and everything, I highly recommend like a dust mask. With contact cement glue, you do want to use a respirator. You do not want to breathe any of those fumes. Windows open, respirator, have your door closed if you're doing it inside, and your pets outside of the room. If you're wearing a respirator, your furry friend should not be breathing the same air either. So, yeah. And then a Plasti dip, you're going to want to do that outside in your garage or backyard. Respirator. Painting, if you're painting by hand with just acrylic paint and paintbrush, you're good for the most part. If you're airbrush painting, respirator. It's dust in the air. You cannot see it, but it's there. So, good question though. I have an Iwata Eclipse. I recommend, if you are starting off with airbrush painting, get the cheapest one. Get a kit on Amazon that has the airbrush gun, a bunch of different ones, because I prefer the one with the little bucket on top, but they have other ones where it has one that is on the bottom, and a bunch of different other ones, and everybody has different preferences. So trying that out. Also with the kits, they'll typically come with some starter paints, as well as your air compressor and the hoses, and that'll at least get you started to see do I like this? Typically, like a kit can cost you like 100, 120 for the very cheapest one. For if you are, I want to do this professional, or I want this to be like master level class for competing and stuff, invest slowly. After you've practiced and you've destroyed your basic one and you learn how to clean it properly, personal experiences, then invest in like an water clips airbrush gun. Those will cost you more, around like $250 for just the gun itself. And then investing in a bigger, like upgrading everything slowly. But I use Createx Colors airbrush paint, and that is like chef's kiss. Like best of the best. You're gonna get the most vibrant colors. You can do gradients with them, and I also use their sealer. I will say I am sponsored by them, but I'm not sponsored to say anything good about them or anything. So, but they are my go-to paint and sealer for any type of EVA foam or leather projects, because I airbrush paint all my leather and fabric, and everything is with that. So. You can. For starting off, it's okay, but it looks a little more messy, and you have less control. Where an airbrush gun, you have basically a fine tip, and you can spray like a tiny little circle, where a paint can will give you a circle like that with a spray, and it is a lot harder to get like fine precision, and you'll never have like a clean line with that, unfortunately. But you can do it for like, if you just wanted to paint it all silver, that's fine. And you can go back in by hand with some like black paint or like a sponge and kind of do little messy, like textury, like metal grime, and that works too. I just do it straight on the piece. I mix in my airbrush cap, like just here's some yellow, here's some green, mix it. That's pretty. I mean, that's literally what I do.
Like blending colors on your piece.
Like the gradient.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so with the airbrush gun, basically for this, it was this color, or like a mid color to start off with. And then for airbrush paint, you can just, while it's still wet, so you'd spray like all of this, and then you mix your next color, and then you want to do more of a heavy here and kind of feather it lightly. Okay. So you go farther away, you do a more spray outwards, where if you're closer, you're going to get a more pigmented section. So then you can kind of feather it up and down, go a little bit darker here. That's how you get the gradients.
Okay.
Other things for doing shadowing, same thing of my favorite trick, but it's not on this one because this is not the type of weapon for that. For like, we'll say here, if you want it to have like really nice shadowing for airbrush painting, you would spray your color for the gold, wait for it to dry, and then with black airbrush paint, spray it on top. You gotta work in smaller sections though, depending on your temperature, because if it's too hot, your paint's gonna dry a lot faster here in Texas. If it's too cold, well, you got a little bit more time. Humidity, paint on a different day. But while it's still wet, you would want to use paper towels and wipe it off as much as possible. And wherever it's not going to hit, you'll have the shadowing. And don't use oil paints. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't. Oh. Oil paints last forever, and don't mix oil paint and acrylic. Please don't. Oh. But yeah, so just wiping it away with a paper towel, you'll have it all in a natural negative spot. I use a sealer though, Createx Colors UVLS Satin Clear, and that one you can apply with a airbrush gun, or you can apply it by paintbrush, and I do it by paintbrush because I want to work inside. All my airbrush stuff is done in the garage, and I'm here in Texas, so y'all know the pain. So yeah. So depending on how much it is, so like This part, I'm not concerned with it collapsing unless somebody really is just
Step on it.
Yeah, same with this, I'm not concerned with it just because for this one specifically, it has the shape of the moon is one piece of foam that's flat, and then there's the triangle part on both sides glued to it. So it has a wall in the center, and that kind of helps with the support structure. Other ways that you can do, if this was any thicker, like these are also hollow, these little spike parts. But you can also do, for like this part, I could do like a center piece and just kind of have it in between, like Christmas ornament boxes. You know how they have like the little cardboard pieces? So, yeah, and so if you have that kind of on the inside, that'll help it with collapsing. For breastplates specifically, you may want to enhance. It's totally fine, you know. But traveling in a suitcase with, you know, little rounder bumps gets squished pretty easily, and it's hard to fix that even with a heat gun. And for those pieces, I'll do Warbler underneath. And so you have a hard structure there, and then I put the EVA foam on top, and nobody sees the understructure, but they see this nice uncrinkled and stepped on piece. So, yeah. So I will, like, for instance, this piece. I want to make a Keyblade. I found tiny little image like that big of the Keyblade that I wanted. And then I start to do my 2D line work in Adobe Illustrator to get just the shape of it. And then I will scale it to my short people size. And then I will put it into a PDF document because I actually have blueprints for sale on my website. So everything that I make, I put on my website to help people patterning, blueprinting, and all. So I'll make that into a life-size printout piece, and I think this was like 6 or 7 pages. Print it out, tape it together, and then I can figure out from there like the shape that I want. And then I can kind of cut apart, like for this part, like which piece I want on what. It depends on the design of the armor. It also depends on, for me, if you saw me in my Alice armor, that one, the breastplate was actually, so there was a piece that went from here to here, and then there was another piece that went to here. They were connected in the back by zipper only, but they were not connected in the front, so it was like a roly-poly. So when I moved, it did this. Otherwise, when you bend, any part that bends, if you have EVA foam right here and you bend, yay, you have a nice crease forever. It's always going to be there. Same with your belly. So yeah, those are kind of downfalls. I've done attachments depending on the design where it's a zipper down the back, depending on, Alice, for instance, was that one, just because it was really structural. Where like my Ariel costume with the giant blue wings, that one, the breastplate to the back piece, because it had a harness that had to be attached underneath it, it was a front section and a back section with Velcro tabs on the top and on the sides. So it just depends on the design, but Velcro, EVA foam 2mm underneath, and put them together. Okay, typically the best. So. It's super lightweight. I prefer it over Warbler. Warbler used to be, back in the day, like the go-to for everybody. You can still work with it. It's still fun. It's just a lot more of a mess for me of like glues and using wood glue to smooth the surface, where EVA foam is just really easy to transport, and you can disassemble it. You can Velcro pieces together. Prop-wise, you can also use for larger props. So like anything larger than this, I'll actually go to insulation foam. It's technically cheaper, but there's a lot of like health risk with it. You do have to wear gloves when working with it, using a respirator. You do not want to inhale insulation foam at all. And I'll actually cover my insulation foam pieces with EVA foam. So that way it still has the same consistent texture on the top, where painting insulation foam looks more like you painted, like you have the Halloween displays of the little like stones, the gravestones.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like that one painted a lot of times, where EVA foam you get a lot better of a nicer like just base coat. So covering insulation foam with EVA foam helps. Right now I'm making I think it's the Almudrod blade from Monster Hunter Rise. It's 8 feet long, and it does disassemble too. So that's been the challenge. But it's a base of CPVC pipes to have male and female to connect it, and then it has a base of insulation foam, and it's then covered in the EVA foam, so I can attach all the EVA foam pieces on top of it. Because, side note, with insulation foam, you can't use contact cement glue on it because it melts. So you have to use just like wood glue, and then just put weights on it and wait 24 hours and hope it didn't shift. So I'll just cover it as like, here's my base cardboard box to put over it kind of thing. And then I'll do all of my decoration on top of it. And it's lighter weight and more affordable for larger builds. So depending on your project, depends on what you want. Let's see, I started crafting in 2008, and then I took a break in college, came back and made my Valkyrie Mercy. I started with insulation foam and Warbler because I wanted to do armor. No. And I actually won a contest at Ikkicon for that one, and Kamui Cosplay, she was the judge, and I asked her, what did you use here for your shoulder pads? It's so lightweight. And she's like, oh, EVA foam. I'm like, I'm gonna look into that. And then that kind of started me down the rabbit hole of like figuring out, well, what is this material? And there was definitely a learning curve, but I love it now, and it's really fun to work with. Whatever is available at Home Depot and Lowe's, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I've tried ordering on Amazon, and a lot of times they've just been hit or miss of they don't have what I ordered, or it didn't come with like the actual proper filters. You want to use some that are more for heavy duty chemicals and not just sanding, because I mean if you're using it just to sand, sanding one's fine. But if you're like painting for airbrush painting or doing Plasti dip specifically, always use a respirator Plasti dip. Don't breathe in the rubber spray paint fumes. Rubber and you, not good, not good. But yeah, so like chemical painting ones specifically, if they have them, and don't toss your old one out until you can find replacements first. Yeah. Bring it inside. So
Inside.
yes, so not your piece, the can.
Okay.
So what I do, it's very cold in the garage, and I'll have like heat lamps around just to warm up the area. I'm a tiny person. I freeze when it gets past 70. And I will leave my piece out there, but I'll take the Plasti dip can inside for at least an hour. Once it goes under 60 degrees outside, bring the airbrush or like the Plasti dip can inside. Let it be inside at room temperature for an hour, and then you can go and do your coat. Once you're done with your coat, because it's got to dry, take the can back inside. Keep it warm. There are some people that have heated it up in like the stovetop. I can't recommend that because Plasti dip is explosive. For this, doing 3 coats on both sides. So a coat is like, it's almost about to drip. That's the thickness of a Plasti dip coat that you want. Your first coat is going to be a little bit lighter. I prefer gray over black just because you can actually see it dry better, at least in the garage when it's black and I'm working at night. The lights make it really hard to tell, especially if you're working with black EVA foam. Black on black makes it just difficult to see the drying and if it's wet or not. But yeah, bringing it inside, spraying this. I want to say this was probably like a can and a half of Plasti dip alone. So this is a can of Plasti dip costs you like $5.99. So you gotta kind of budget also. Get it on sale if you can. Buy in bulk if you can on Amazon. But having multiple cans inside. Investing also in the spray can little trigger thing. It's like a little attachment you can apply on it. saves your finger so much because all the spray cans you're pushing with your finger kills you. If you got to spray a whole armor collection, and sometimes that'll take up to 3 days to do, and you go through like 15 cans of Plasti dip, your hand is dead. So having the little just a handgun where you just pull like this, even coat, never spray. So if you're spraying from here to here, always start your spray off of the piece. Don't start your spray on the piece because that initial burst is going to be heavier than anywhere else. So it'll help with like your even coat. I'm in a townhome and I have a garage, two-car garage that doesn't have cars in it.
Okay.
So, and then my airbrush booth is, I cannot say the word, it is an armoire. Thank you, I can never say that one. It's one of those tongue twisters for me. But I bought it from IKEA. It was like $100 I invested in a few years ago. And just, it has like the little shelf for your clothing. You can hang up your pieces so you don't lay them on the ground, or you can lay them on the ground too. And then I have a chair, and then it has like your little shelving system, and I have all my airbrush paint in there and all my attachments. So if you want to do it a lot, I say recommend in that. Otherwise, I also do it just sitting on the ground, and I have cardboard like boxes just laid out for larger pieces. With spraying your pieces on the ground, save all the caps from all of your spray paint and all of your Plasti dip, because Plasti dip, if you're spraying on a table and you keep spraying, the Plasti dip will actually fuse from your piece to whatever surface you're having it on. And so when you peel it off, it'll peel off from your piece as well. So having it where, specifically with this one, the cap part of the Plasti dip I put under here, and under here. And that raised it just enough off the table where I could still do that without having any of the pieces attached with the Plasti dip anyway. Depends on your weather. Typically for Plasti dip, I will do, just on a normal Texas day, I'll say like 90 degrees. I'll wait like 45 minutes to an hour, one coat, then I go work inside, just have a timer on, and then come back downstairs and do it again. If it goes below 70 degrees outside, you will want to wait probably like an hour, hour and a half. Plasti dip, you really want to wait longer than what you think, just because if it's still wet and you're applying it, like the surface may look dry, but underneath might still be wet. So when you have the initial burst of Plasti dip on top to your somewhat dry surface, that somewhat dry surface will then, and you'll get like a dip and then like the pool onto the other side, if that makes sense. So that's kind of that part. If it's humid, like really humid outside, then you gotta wait a really long time. Sometimes, at least with airbrush painting, because Plasti dip, you do not want to take your piece inside. You want it to stay outside to dry. And after your final coat, wait a full 24 hours, just because the smell is really, really bad. But with airbrush painting, depending on the humidity, if it's too humid, once I'm done painting it, I'll only paint one side at a time. I typically don't paint both unless I'm doing a gradient around, and then I have it where it's propped up, not propped, but take it inside to dry, because your house is probably less humid than it is outside here. I would recommend detached, but you can still do that. I would say make sure all of your windows are closed on that side of your apartment, so you don't want the window next to it to be there open. You don't want your door to be open when you spray. And very quickly inside, and I would recommend a towel to line the bottom of your door, depending on how old the apartment is, so the fumes don't come in. But probably wait a little bit longer, so at least like an hour, hour and 20, so that way you have less fumes coming in and out. So, yeah, let me do a time check. We are at 2:01, so that was our last question. Yes. Thank you guys for coming.